What was El Dorado really? Today, we think of El Dorado in the same way we think of it in the Disney movie, that it's a lost Native American city of gold, a very, very rich city, or perhaps an entire civilization hidden off somewhere deep in the interior of South America, although Disney puts it in Mexico, which is odd to me, but whatever. But that's really not actually what El Dorado was, according to the original legend. The original legend came from somewhere in Ecuador or Colombia, and it was around Lake Guatavita in one of the tribes nearby there, probably the Muisca tribe. And they would essentially have this king who would sit on a raft, or it may have even been a golden raft, and he was covered in some kind of gold dust, like either literal gold dust or thin, malleable sheets of gold that were placed across his body. And then when he reached the center of this primordial lake, he would dive in and essentially wash the gold off of him. And it's even thought that they would give gold offerings such as jewelry or ornaments or gold statues, gold artifacts, what have you, into this lake, essentially giving piety to the gods, giving offering to the gods to bless the tribe, possibly to bring the rains for helping harvesting crops and growing crops. That's the original legend of El Dorado. And eventually that evolved into these lost cities of gold that Spaniards would hear about somewhere further off in the interior. Now, Lake Guatavita, it is in the greater region of Amazonia, but not really what we call Amazonia. And these stories of these lost golden civilizations hidden somewhere in the interior of the Amazon began permeating out and spreading their way through this new Spanish colonial world that was being established on the west coast of South America, on the opposite side of the Andes from the Amazon. And so Spaniards became fascinated by this idea, and they saw some glimpses and heard evidence and rumors from tribes on the peripheral of the Amazon of greater civilizations in the interior, but the Spaniards never actually found the civilizations. They were too far away, and they never seemed to actually be along the Amazon River. 500 years later, I have the ability to look back on this, knowing much more than the Spaniards exploring the Amazon did at the time, and try to piece together something that makes sense. And what I think is that El Dorado, the actual legend of El Dorado, probably really was about this gilded one, or the golden one, this king who would go out on the lake covered in gold and dive in and wash the gold off of him for the gods. However, I also think that El Dorado, the legend, meaning lost golden civilizations or hidden civilizations in the Amazon, is also true as well, because we would hear about Percy Fawcett. He heard about places off in the Amazon as well that were these rich, sophisticated, advanced, large, sprawling civilizations, but he had never actually referred to it as El Dorado. He called it the Lost City of Z or Zed. And my impression looking back on this is I think that El Dorado was probably all of the Amazon. I think the entire Amazon was filled with huge, sprawling, shockingly sophisticated civilizations, not only along the river, but in the interiors as well. And I think that even to this day, the Amazon, the environment just hasn't been conquered enough for us to be able to really get in there and understand what was going on in that world. But I have no doubts that during the time of Orellana, 1541 to 1542, going down the Amazon River, there definitely were these filthy rich civilizations existing within the Amazon, and that by the time Percy Fawcett came, the reason that he may have never actually found them is because Spanish disease had spread throughout the Amazon and had wiped out millions and millions of people, entire civilizations just disappearing overnight and then being swallowed up by the jungle. The next question I have is whether or not Orellana made anything up. This was something that was kind of common among some explorers. They would make up things or exaggerate things to be able to secure funding for their next expedition, because this was, for some of these explorers, this was how they were actually going to make a livelihood, make a name for themselves, become famous, become rich, or secure a second opportunity to go back and perform another major conquest. Now, a lot of scholars think that Orellana was drastically making things up, that the huge snakes and sprawling cities and the mystical towns that he visited and the shamans that he saw, and especially the lighter skinned Amazon women warriors that seem to reflect the legends of the Amazon Greek warriors from Greek mythology. They especially thought that that was made up to try to allure the king into funding another expedition. But I don't know. I think that there were so many things that existed in the American world that he saw that really don't make sense to the Western European mind. And after the Spaniards left, they spread influenza across the Amazon. And every future return that Europeans made into the interior of the Amazon, they found less and less and less of what Orellana was able to find. And as time went on, Europeans became suspicious of Orellana. And by the late 1800s and the early 1900s, during Percy Fawcett's expeditions, they were essentially saying, Orellana, he was just lying about everything that he saw. None of it was true. He was just lying to secure funding. But in reality, I think that probably what happened was that the disease was leaping in front of the Spanish army and wiping out Native American civilization by the millions. Entire cities were disappearing overnight, again being swallowed up by the jungle to never be seen again. We have to remember that when Pizarro arrived in Peru, the Inca emperor Atahualpa's father was already dying of some kind of disease. And most likely what had happened is in the early 1500s, let's travel out of South America, back up through Mexico, back up into the Caribbean. There were European traders who were poking around on the coast of the Yucatan and interacting with the Maya people, just barely, not conquesting, not really going inland, but just landing upon the shore, interacting and speaking with these people. Well, they infected those Maya people with European disease, and that disease began sweeping across the Maya world. By the time when Cortez arrived in 1519 on the coast of Veracruz, he was meeting with the Maya people, the Mesoamerican people, and he describes them as small, weak, and sickly. Well, they had been getting sick for the last 2 decades. Now, let's travel to the other side of the Maya world, off the coast of Belize, the Caribbean coast. It's going down Belize, down modern-day Central America, through Panama, spreading into Colombia and across the Amazon, down into the Inca Empire, where in 1532, Pizarro then arrives. After Cortez has conquered the Aztec Empire, they followed the gold trade routes down into South America. Pizarro arrives, and now this same disease is spreading across the Inca realm. The Inca were in trade and war with the Amazonians, so this disease was also already spreading through the Amazon as well. It was jumping entire continents ahead of the Spaniards. So, the things that Orellana saw, I really highly doubt that he was exaggerating. Maybe they were romanticizing the things that they saw, possibly. But I think that if they were to do that, they probably would have exaggerated much, much more. I just read through the first-hand accounts, the historical sources of Orellana's expedition written by Gaspar de Carvajal, and I really think that if they were going to exaggerate, they would have exaggerated a hell of a lot more.